Salutations, dark passengers. Deqster here. Normally I'd start by just giving you the title of whatever it is I'm going to narrate and then jump right into the story. This time I have something a little different for you. While my channel isn't usually about quote-unquote true stories, today I have just that. You see, my father has had a lot of experiences one might classify as supernatural, paranormal, or otherwise out of the ordinary. What I'm sharing today is his experience in his words, without embellishment or fanfare. He's been going through a lot of health-related issues of late, and I wanted to honor a commitment I made to him to tell this story here on my channel. Dad, this one's for you. Lights in the Distance by Shadow Chaser. Summer solstice, June 21st, 1995, or maybe 94. Not really sure. Since it's about 30 years ago, that memory eludes me for exactly what year. But it was definitely June 21st. A friend of mine and I were headed to the high desert that early morning, somewhere out there where not many roam, except maybe a cowboy or two, or maybe a hunter or a gatherer of treasures like myself and my friend, Fender. I called him that because he played pretty good guitar, and myself, Walking Ghost, a name given to me by my elders after I shared a true story with them. The story I'm about to tell you. Like I said before, we were headed out to the high desert. We found a tucked away place to park at around 4 a.m. We packed up our gear and headed north on foot. We usually walked close for a while, and then we would split up and go our separate ways. My day was pretty uneventful, finding a few small deer antlers and a village site from over 200 years ago that I'd come across before. The site was full of broken arrowheads and busted grinding bowls for roots and such. We hiked until dark. It was a long day, and we both were tired. It was now 9 p.m., June 21st. We had some food and talked about how the moon would be full, and decided that we should drive up to a high point. So we did just that. And when we arrived on top of this high desert plateau, I put the rig in neutral and left it running with the brake set. We were now parked alongside the gravel road we drove in on. Nobody was in sight, and we were at about a 4,500-foot elevation. We both got out of the rig. I was checking out the moon with my binoculars while standing outside the rig looking due east. It was the biggest full moon I had ever seen in my life, and it appeared as though we were just a touch higher than the moon itself. It was straight across the river canyon from us. While looking across the river canyon, I noticed a small yellow and orange light. I put the binoculars on it and checked it out slowly. After a few seconds, I came to the assumption that it was a campfire and continued to observe it. Fender hadn't said much about the fire or light, but I could tell he was interested in what I was looking at. Suddenly, the fire looked more like a lantern and had started to move. It was about a half-mile away, now coming across the canyon. It was headed toward us, but somewhat to our left. After a few minutes, the light was closer and about 300 feet below the crest of the hill we were on. The light now looked as if it were two headlights, moving about 3 feet off the ground. The pair of lights bounced like it was a four-wheeler traveling over rough ground. I put the binoculars on it and convinced myself that there was a guy on a four-wheeler way down below us. We were both standing outside the rig, watching these strange lights down below us, when a gust of wind blew across us from over our heads. We both looked up and said,
"What was that?"
We saw a rectangular object. It was all lit up around its entire edge. Lights appeared to be strung across the center of it, making this rectangle look like the shape of a window with 4 panes. It stopped right out in front of us, less than 200 feet in the air. I put the binoculars on it and saw small panels like those ones on the bottom of the space shuttle, and it was charcoal in color. The moon made a good light and was helping me to see its color. The fact that it was only 75 yards out in front of us, hovering in midair, didn't hurt either. The lights on this object dimmed down slowly and turned off. The object was gone. At that moment, it didn't move left or right, up or down. It was just simply gone. I stepped up on the van's running board for a better view, and there was nothing there. We both said at the same time exactly,
Where'd it go?
Fender now asked me for the binoculars. I gave them to him, and he began checking out the lights below us. He suddenly realized that both lights were somehow connected or flying together. I kept looking overhead in the sky, where we saw the other object disappear right in front of us. Still, I saw no sign of it. I was still standing on the running board, and 1 moment later, Fender was jumping into the van and yelling at me,
"Let's get the hell out of here!"
screaming,
What? What is it?
I jumped off the running board and into the van, throwing myself behind the steering wheel. He yelled again.
Go! 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 Get out of here!
He said.
It's right outside the van.
I told Fender I wasn't leaving until I got my binoculars back from him, so I could take a look at what he was yelling about. It hadn't dawned on me that he said, "It's right outside the van." He shoved the binoculars at me. I took them and stepped outside the van. I first saw the lights with my naked eyes, and it was about 3 feet off the ground and less than 75 feet from me. It was floating. Those 2 lights looked like a 4-wheeler's headlights. I put the binocs to my eyes and looked straight at this vehicle. It stopped coming towards me, then rotated 180 degrees, exposing 2 small red lights on the opposite end of the vehicle. Still floating, it began to move slowly away from me. At that point, I jumped into my rig and drove off down the road toward the bottom of the hill. A mile down, we crossed a bridge over a river, and I stopped the rig and turned around. I said to Fender that I was going back up there. I wanted to get a better look and find out what this thing was. I drove back the way we came until we reached the top of the hill, where we were parked before. We were facing due west this time. We saw 2 small red lights, like on the back of a 4-wheeler. These lights appeared to be 4 to 5 inches in diameter. The moment we saw them, both red lights flew away from each other. One headed north, and the other flew south. They both soon disappeared. We continued driving down to the bottom of the hill, where we came to a crossroad. My friend Fender said,
Stop. Pull over.
He reached into the glove box and pulled out some paper and pencils. Then he told me to draw what I saw in the sky over the vehicle. So I did, and he did the same. Just a couple minutes later, we both presented each other with a drawing of the same exact shape. We had not talked about it up to that point. I guess Fender had to make sure we both had seen the same thing, cementing our shared experience. We settled down some after taking time to converse about what we had just witnessed, and then decided to head to a campsite for the night that we had decided on earlier in the day. When we arrived at our campsite, we couldn't settle down enough to sleep. We grabbed some gear, flashlights, food, and so on, and took off on foot at 1 a.m. into the dark, wondering if we were to come into contact with more lights in the sky. We spent the next 2 years returning to this area on a near-weekly basis, only to discover the sightings intensified and became almost a common occurrence. Each sighting and story was more intense than the last. Perhaps I'll write down more of them in time. I've begun with these events, written down 30 years later, which are still as vivid in my mind as they were back on that strange summer solstice.